Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Slip Safety Show. I'm Christian Harris and my guest today is Mike Boxall of Sitemark. Mike has got a fascinating business. Basically what they do is they benchmark the performance of facilities management functions. We focus primarily in our conversation on cleaning, but that could include waste management, recycling and lots of other things as well, which Mike does touch on towards the end. Why is this important? Well, I think this is really critical for any business because cleaning is no longer just cleaning as it has been in the past, but actually in our coronavirus world, it's the first defence against people contracting the disease. It's the first defence to protect your reputation as a business, and it becomes vitally important to get this right. So where Mike's expertise lies is really understanding what is best practice in this field and how to measure and quantify that. So they can help people, as he'll tell us, looking whether they've got an in-house cleaning team or an external team at what they could do to improve their efficiencies and improve the outcomes they get. It's a fascinating conversation, particularly of use if you are in the sector or you have any outsourced cleaning and you're wondering if you're getting best value for money. And I'll give you a spoiler alert, you're probably getting what you pay for, and if you want to improve your outcomes from cleaning, it's all about investing in the best practices to drive up performance outcomes. Anyway, with that, let's get into it with Mike Boxall of Sitemark. Mike Boxall, welcome to the Slip Safety Show.
Thank you. Good afternoon to you.
It's great to have you here. Are you in your office? It looks like those probably aren't your blinds at home, or maybe they are.
No, they're not. It's one of the few days at the moment that I've actually got to the office. We have maybe 15 or so normally here, and they're all working from home at the moment. So we are. Yeah, I'm just in to check up on everything, catch up with.
Good chance to get some stuff done with no interruptions.
With no barking dogs. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
right.
Well, thanks for joining me today. Do you want to just give the people listening or watching a quick overview of kind of a bit of your background and then what Sitemark does?
Sure. Yeah. So I think like most people in the cleaning and facilities industry, I fell into it many years ago, working for a janitorial supplier, and who went out of business, and I was there jobless, but with some relationships, some contacts, and I thought, well, I can do this, and I started just taking over a handful of customers that had worked for this previous business, and without any sort of planning or thought or anything, I really just sort of fell into being self-employed, which was almost 30 years ago now. So I started out as a janitorial supplier, and did that for a number of years.
Yeah,
and did very well at it. We as express cleaning suppliers, we were one of the first suppliers to sell commercial cleaning equipment online.
Okay.
And our business grew really quickly, and we were selling equipment all over the world. But that became a very commoditized market. A lot of products bought and sold on price, and we started offering consultancy. And we were charging people essentially for advice on which equipment to buy.
Yeah.
And if they bought equipment from us, if they subsequently bought it from us, then there would be no charge. But if they went and bought it elsewhere, we would charge them for that advice.
Yeah.
And that consultancy business really started to take off, and we decided to move full time into consultancy. We were fortunate to sell the janitorial business, which still trades today, actually. And there was born iClean Systems, which focused on benchmarking cleaning services. And the benchmarking, again, it evolved over a period of time. Consultancy is quite a tricky business because it's feast or famine. You spend all your time trying to get the business in, and then you deliver it, and then you've got none coming in. So the benchmarking allows us to build relationships, ongoing relationships with customers, where we go on a regular basis, typically 6-monthly basis. We review all aspects of cleaning service delivery. So that'll be operational things, financial, compliance, and HR. We produce a report, make recommendations, and either identify things that could be improved, or ultimately say, well, this is what we consider as a best practice service delivery. And to date, we've benchmarked over 300 service providers at more than 7,500 commercial buildings, which cover everything from airports to zoos. And in the past couple of years, we've rebranded from iClean to SiteMark so that we can extend that benchmarking process and methodology into other areas of FM. We're seeing that more and more of them are being combined, and we started adding services like recycling and waste to the benchmarking criteria. Now we've added other soft services, things like portering and security, and most recently we're now developing benchmarking over wellness, workplace wellness. So quite a long journey really, from a little one-man band janitorial supplier through to the sort of organisation where we're dealing with a lot of blue chip clients, high profile customers, and working with a lot of service providers as well.
Good. Well, congratulations for that very positive journey, and we've known each other for some time, and I've always thought that your service has been really valuable. I mean, what would you say are the benefits of doing benchmarking? You know, not necessarily you working with you guys, but just the benefits of benchmarking your performance against best practice, or against, you know, the contract, or against other people in the market.
Well, it's really about trying to identify and share that best practice. It's really understanding, what best in class looks like. And as an organisation that's delivering its own cleaning services or is buying services in, you've really only got one point of reference, and things might look good. And even when you go to tender, you might get 4, 5, 6 suppliers, maybe more, that you compare against, but you often are only able to compare against their theoretical performance. So really, it's well, they say they're going to do this. Benchmarking gives you the data and the evidence to say, actually, this is as good as we can get for the money that we pay. So benchmarking gives you the transparency, and it gives you the confidence and the scale of being able to say, well, let's not just look at ourselves internally or 3 or 4 suppliers externally. Let's just look at the whole market, those 300 plus providers, to say, well, really, what are the best elements out there? And if we can take and identify and take the best elements from different sectors, that's how we get to that best in class service delivery. So it is about scale.
And have you, I mean, obviously you've done a lot of sites now and a lot of suppliers. I mean, have you found that, but I guess that if you think about the number of buildings there are in the UK, there's still a huge room to grow there, which is exciting. Have you found that, people are really grabbing hold of this and running hard with it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the past few years, particularly with austerity, people have been cutting back. Cleaning is largely labour, and wage inflation has been huge over the past few years with the national living wage. So I think people have taken the easy quick wins where they may have reduced their cleaning specification or their frequencies in lower risk areas to offset that increase in labour. But now they're at a point where they think, right, where do we go now? And particularly in today's environment, where people may have reduced the frequency of cleaning in the past, now we're expected with coronavirus and current situation to increase those frequencies, which come with a massive increase in cost. Now people are thinking, all right, well, how are we going to be? We've done the easy quick wins. Now what are the really clever bits that we can do to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of cleaning service delivery. So we have seen an increase in adoption benchmarking, and we would certainly expect it to increase again in the near future.
Yeah. And my experience, which I'm sure is yours, but it'd be interesting to get your answer to this, is that you'll often hear complaints or grumbles about delivery by contractors, but actually once you get into the nitty gritty of it, in my experience, again, they're pretty much always delivering on exactly what the contract says, and the issue is actually between the person that signed the contract at head office and the difference of opinion between what that says and what the manager of the particular facility thinks the standard should be. But they're not. But they're getting what they're paying for. Is that what you see as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of our business comes from dissatisfaction with a service provider. It starts with that. A client will come to us and say, not happy with the service provider, they're not delivering. Can you help us find another one? And we say, yeah, absolutely we can. We've worked with many. We know what can be delivered and how and for what budget. But before we move to another provider, let's go through and see what the current provider is doing and why it might be falling down. And a lot of the times, yes, you do find that a client is expecting a gold or silver service delivery, but they've got a bronze budget.
Yeah.
And you're faced with a conversation that says, well, with TUPE and everything else, we can find another provider, we can transfer all those staff over, but you're likely to get the same people doing the same thing in the same way with the same result.
Yeah.
And it's a really inefficient thing to do. And the best results that we've seen are generally where we're working with an incumbent supplier and we're helping manage the expectation of the client to say, look, if you want a gold standard, you've got to pay a gold price.
Yeah.
If you're restricted to a silver budget, then you can only expect silver standards.
Yeah, or maybe we can achieve gold in certain areas, but bronze in other areas, and balancing it out. And I mean, my experience is that, I mean, we're obviously in the specialist side of cleaning, and we're doing one-off jobs and things like that. But money is available for certain environments where there's a certain priority and where they can see the clients can see a tangible result for the investment they make. They do seem willing to spend more money where they deem it's valuable.
Yeah, and this is the key thing really, is it's trying to look at costs holistically and not micromanage costs. So your example is a good one, isn't it? I would guess on insurance claims, people that are responsible for paying out the insurance premiums are generally not necessarily the same people that are responsible for paying the cleaning contract. Exactly. And whilst everybody is under pressure to reduce costs, if you step back and say, well, actually, if we just increased our costs there, we'd reduce this cost massively.
Yeah.
So trying to educate people that micromanaging costs is not necessarily the best thing is one of the challenges that we've got.
I was looking on your website, and there's some really great data there in terms of biggest. You don't call it savings. I think it's efficiencies or gains, or do you want to? And even I think the worst case was about 9% or something that you've improved. So do you want to just give us an idea of some of those success stories? Maybe naming names, maybe not, but just in terms of the figures would be interesting to know.
Yeah. Well, we deal with such a wide range of sites and contracts, and interestingly, about half of our business is with in-house operations, and half of it is with contracted operations. In-house tends to be those in higher education, so universities and the NHS in particular. The NHS goes through cycles, and it is going through and really sort of finished this cycle of a lot of services now being brought back in-house.
Yeah.
It's really, I mean, we have a huge amount of data, and it's really interesting to see the variations in sectors and in-house delivery and even contracted delivery. And probably one of the questions when we start talking about in-house and contracted provision, and people usually come back and say, well, which is best? And it's a question that I love, really, because how do you measure best?
Shall I give you my answer?
Yes, go on. What's your
answer? So my answer to that is it depends on the budget, because if you've got your own in-house team right now and you want to outsource and you're not going to increase the budget, you can't expect, I don't think, any particular improvement, because you're bringing in a layer of management and profit, because people need to make a profit, and therefore what can you expect? So that's what I would say.
Okay, but that is often offset by the fact that when you bring in a specialist, they are specialists. And they are the ones, the service providers are the ones that know what innovation is out there, and they are often the ones that are early adopters of technology and processes and systems that actually improve the performance. So actually, they are generally very good at offsetting those costs and overheads. And often those are costs and overheads that a customer doesn't realise they've got anyway. So if you imagine an in-house operation at a university, they could have 300 cleaners at a university, and you suddenly outsource that, and you pay for an element of management charge for managing those staff, and that's what their central overhead is. And you would think that's an additional cost, but actually it's hidden in the university's payroll costs. So actually often, and the interesting thing in terms of all of those providers that we've looked at and all of those sites is, in terms of average performance, on average, in-house service delivery is more efficient.
Okay.
However, when you talk about best in class, we found that the performance level is much greater with contracted service delivery. So the best sites that we've seen have been contracted. And actually the worst sites that we've seen have been contracted.
Right, yeah.
So you could say what is best. Well, if we're talking about average figures, we'd say on average in-house is better. Talking about best in class and value for money and service delivery and efficiency and effectiveness, actually, if it's run properly, it's those contracted sites. And those contracted sites and those contracted providers are far and away more able to cover their costs of their central overheads and all the sort of things that aren't necessarily directly involved with an in-house delivery.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I do a lot of work in the leisure sector, as you know, and one of the challenges there is that they don't, if they're good doing cleaning in-house, they don't typically have a dedicated cleaning team as such, and therefore they just don't know what they're spending on cleaning. And so to think about, well, we're going to outsource that, what's that going to cost? They're going to see a quote across 100 sites or whatever, and they're going to think, wow, that's just like, we can't spend that. But they are spending that already. It's just that they're spending it here, there and everywhere, and as you say, probably not in a very efficient way.
No, and we've seen that where you have, call it multi-activity roles, or you could have pool assistants or lifeguards or whatever, and they're the ones responsible for doing the cleaning. And often there is no separate budget. The only thing they really look at and analyse is the cost of materials and equipment. But as soon as you outsource that, yes, you get that additional cost of labour because it's been separated out, but the client doesn't necessarily see that as a benefit because it doesn't come out of their current payroll costs. And inevitably, multi-activity roles and for, again, I would suggest that the leisure industry, cleaning is the last thing they'll do. Other things are more important. I'm sure, lifeguarding is more important, potentially, if somebody drowning in the pool.
But it's no different to you don't want anybody drowning, that's for sure. But it's like in restaurants or cafes, or there's various other sectors as well that sort of say they will self-deliver their cleaning, but they don't really clean. It's done at the end of the day, and it's a quick wipe down, and you can see that if probably a layperson maybe wouldn't see it, but you and I would see that if we went into one of these places. We would see the corners, and we would see or feel the sticky residues on the tabletops and so on and so forth.
Absolutely, because their primary focus in restaurants is to get the food out, isn't it? And they don't think about it, which is why with a service provider who is focused on delivering that, that's all they're measuring is how clean it is. And that's the argument for having a specialist contracted service.
Yeah.
That's not to say that you can't achieve the same things with in-house, but you need that specialist management to deliver that.
And the knowledge as well, which I think is something that, you know, people just don't have. I mean, my personal view is that, you know, there's probably less specialist knowledge, for want of a better term, in the cleaning industry now than there was 10 years ago, and therefore there's even less within clients.
Absolutely. Roles are merged, and people are taking on more and more responsibility. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I don't think there is that expertise in-house, or indeed often with the contracted service, because it's been costed out.
Yeah,
very definitely.
So we touched on the coronavirus earlier, obviously, and in terms of increased frequency of cleaning. What other changes do you see happening in the space as a result of the virus having hit us so hard?
Within cleaning, I think people are going to want to see cleaners more. We've been talking about this shift from nighttime cleaning to daytime cleaning for quite some time, and I think that this will prompt a further shift towards daytime cleaning, because people will want to see cleaners. In the past, it's been one of those things. Well, no, we don't want to see the cleaners, and what I think is that will drive a more professional view of cleaning in general, which will mean that we have to train cleaners better. They'll be doing other things. There'll be a lot more interaction with staff, and so yes, I think that will facilitate more full-time cleaning operatives, cleaning roles that are better paid and better respected, and I think people will start to take it more seriously. And as I said before, when you consider that only 10% that get tested, or less than 10% that get tested for coronavirus are confirmed, the other 90% are getting other colds and coughs and flus and viruses and things that they've always had. So people are beginning to realise the importance of cleaning, and more importantly, hygiene. I think it'll have a positive effect, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you guys get involved in, you talked about if you're outsourcing, you know, they're measuring the standards and that's kind of their job, and that's obviously critical. Do you get involved in any of your benchmarking with kind of hygiene as well, or is it more on the big things?
Yeah, no, we do, absolutely. So this is one of the consequences of the current situation. We are now doing a lot more work and focusing a lot more on swab testing. Our audits in the past for a standard office building just relied on visual standards of cleanliness. Is it free of dust, dirt, and debris? And now we're looking at swab testing using protein swabs, which don't necessarily test specifically for coronavirus, but the more protein there is on a surface, the more likely that there's going to be, you know, nasty bugs on there. So yeah, absolutely. We've adapted to now include swab testing as an option within our audits. So that's how we'll be measuring cleanliness. We'll be measuring the hygiene element, as well as the visual standards of cleanliness.
I think that's a great thing for the industry, because I see so many examples. Well, as you know, I'm a floor specialist by trade, and I see so many examples of floors which I can see are evenly dirty, but someone else probably looks and they think they look quite clean. So the visual test would probably pass, but actually if you were to quantify the level of contamination, you sort of see, oh, actually that could be a lot better. So I think that's going to really help to drive up the aesthetic standards as well.
Yeah, and with swab testing and ATP testing, it's a lot more statistical. It's less subjective. Although we produce audit scores, it's always very difficult to understand whether one mark on the wall is a fail or not, and one bit of dust or dirt on a floor is a fail. With swab testing, it's very statistical, it's very objective, and I think will be incorporated into cleaning contracts going forward. That this is the standard of hygiene, as well as our visual standards of cleanliness. Separate from that, we want to know that our buildings are hygienically clean. And I think there'll be a big requirement for that independent hygiene assessment and hygiene scoring, in the same way as you might do slip testing, for example.
Exactly. Which hasn't taken off to the same extent the hygiene testing will, but it is happening more than it did, certainly a few years ago. So, looking at things from a sort of helicopter level, then, what would you say are the top, say, 2 or 3 things that you see where kind of clients approach this perhaps not in the best way, and lessons that could be learned from a client perspective? And then we'll ask the same question from a contractor perspective in terms of getting this relationship right.
I mean, with clients, it is about that they do tend to micromanage costs, and they don't understand the value of cleaning, and particularly on a procurement exercise, you've got all your labour, which people perceive as, well, we can't change that, it is what it is, and then you've got all your materials and equipment. And the interesting thing is that for every £1 that you spend on materials and equipment, you spend £100 on the labour operating it throughout the life of a cleaning contract. So procurement people generally are looking at micromanaging all these costs, and they try and squeeze everyone down. It's a bit like training, isn't it? So what are your training costs? Well, they're quite high. Can you look at reducing those? Well, but if we reduce that training cost, we're increasing the labour requirement as a consequence. So I think that's the main issue. That's where clients generally get it wrong. They keep moving from input to output specs. And again, maybe the issues are sometimes down to contractors as well, but it doesn't make any sense to tell a cleaning contractor to clean something that doesn't need cleaning. So if we say that tasks have got to be done at a certain frequency, that's not as efficient as saying, well, at a certain point in time, say once a day or twice a day or 3 times a day, the standards need to look like this. So if they're beyond that, if they've reached that level, then we don't need to do that level of vacuum testing. If it's not, then we do. So again, the specifications, those are one of the areas where we think there's a lot, or we find that there's a lot of improvement to be had. Is just refining that specification, which is driven really by the client. So
I've had some interesting examples over the years of input versus output spec, and actually I think in many cases a kind of a hybrid is probably the way forward, because I remember working with one of the supermarket groups, for example, and there were particular issues around certain floor areas, and we found a solution that worked for them, and they said, okay, we want the contractors to do this, but they didn't sort of stipulate it in any way, and therefore it just didn't get done, whereas actually they would have benefited from having maybe an input spec on that one area where there's been a problem for years and nobody's ever got it right, to solve that thing, and then actually given more flexibility around the rest of the store where actually the standards were generally pretty good.
It's really all down to the measurements, isn't it? Customers they don't want to know, they're not interested, and shouldn't be interested, and should have no value in how often something is being cleaned. Their value is how clean it is at certain frequencies, regardless of whether it's been cleaned or not. So, and everything tends to be dynamic. And when you've got an input spec and you say this has got to be done once a day, that's got to be done once a week, that's got to be done once a month, that's where you don't have any flexibility.
And that's arguably one of the challenges around the whole industry as well, in that I agree that actually, in your business or my business or any business, in fact, the customer that's going to pay us to do whatever we're doing don't really care. They don't really care about how we do it or anything like that. They just want that outcome. Whereas, and I think cleaning, from a purchasing perspective, people seem to forget that, and they focus on, well, how much labour have you got and how much material, and they're looking at it from the input spec, but expecting the output delivery, and it's not the right way of doing it.
No, and I think the answer is in that independent assessment of, look, you're the specialist. This is what we want it to look like, and you decide what equipment you use, how much training you need, how frequently you do things.
Yeah.
But the key to success is measuring whether that's done or not.
Exactly. I think that's it, isn't it? And agreeing what those measurements are and how frequently and stuff. And then it's not a question then of because I think too often it's very subjective, and you could look at something and say it's a 4 out of 10, and I might say it's a 7 out of 10, or vice versa, and it's very you're then sort of butting heads, aren't you? Whereas actually, if it's hygiene testing or a slip test or whatever, objectively, pass or fail.
And that's where there is this lack of trust between client and the service provider, and that's what you've got to build, so you can trust the service provider to say, actually, we found a better way of doing it, which improves this, but the investment is here, and you share the benefit. Yeah. But and that's what we don't see. And although there's talk of long-term contracts, which often get set up in the wrong way, there's still a very much well, let's just do it for 3 years, which 3 years is not a long time.
No, and what actually happens is 18 months in, they're already starting to think about the next tender, and therefore it's not business as usual, and so you never get the benefit of
You don't. And the cost of doing that procurement exercise, the cost and distraction is in itself is not efficient.
Yeah.
So the client doesn't benefit from doing that. So I think one of the things that clients need to do is to look longer term and trust those providers.
Yeah.
But obviously you need those checks in place to make sure that, right, this is what we bought. Are we getting it?
Yeah.
So combination, I think, is the solution.
Yeah. And that's, I suppose, the long-term value of what you're doing, because you're building up this picture and evidence of which providers are performing better in different sectors or whatever it might be, and therefore you can, if you're working on behalf of a client, you can give them more confidence to say, well, look, these guys here have delivered in, you're a university, these guys here have delivered in 10 other universities to this standard, and therefore you probably can invest in a slightly longer contract and therefore get more benefit and have more trust and confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What about from a contractor perspective? What do you see that they're doing, well, or areas for improvement in terms of approaching this client proposition as well?
Yeah, contractors are in a really difficult situation because, again, they struggle to invest in equipment. They're always looking for a return on investment. The margins are it is really tough for a contractor.
It is,
and the client doesn't want to take any risks, and indeed contractors don't want to take those risks as well. So we go to the biggest single area of improvement that we find in client sites is the investment in equipment, and indeed in the training to operate that equipment, which typically is about 30% of the improvement opportunity. It's huge, but you have to make that investment, and it's an upfront investment, and you have to have the contract in place with a reasonable client to be able to get the return on that investment.
Yeah. So you can't get that return in 12 months, can you? So,
and you can't. So we get contractors that we would go and do a review on behalf of a client or a contractor, and we say, right, actually, you could do a much better job by investing in X, Y, and Z. And often they would say, well, actually, we know that, but the return on investment is such that we can't justify that investment on such a short-term contract. So yeah, they are innovative. Contractors are innovative. Sometimes they are forced to take shortcuts because the client micromanages things, and again, it's a very tricky thing to manage.
Yeah, I think, I mean, not individual contractors, but the industry isn't helped by the fact that it's so competitive, because irrespective of quality and all this other stuff, you'll always be able to get a cheaper quote from somewhere. And therefore that has continued to sort of drive that approach of micromanaging costs and driving down margins, because, if you're an OCS or an ISS or an Interserve, etc., you've got a certain cost of doing business, because you've got your head office and your brand and your payroll and all these other things. Whereas if you're Joe's Cleaners around the corner, you've got no cost of doing business, and therefore you can always theoretically quote an individual contract a little bit cheaper, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the quality and the certainty and the insurances and all this other risking.
Absolutely, and there is a cost of doing that, isn't it? And again, they take all the risks with employment law and entitlement to work and things like that. So it's hard for contractors, and they are always having to look over their shoulders to and be aware of contractors that are promising stuff that they really can't deliver.
Yeah.
And when a customer says to you, "Can you do it any cheaper?" What do you say to that client? And all you can do is say, "Well, yes, we'll do it cheaper, but it means that we're going to do less cleaning, which means that your standards are going to drop."
Yeah.
And when there's a competitor on the doorstep that says, "Well, actually, we can do it cheaper, but the standards won't drop," it's a difficult position for a contractor to be in.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of question I get all the time. And we're doing, as I said, one-off or periodic work, and actually the answer most often is, well, no, we can't, unless you happen to be in, I don't know, Newcastle, and we've got a job in Middlesbrough next Tuesday, and therefore actually for us it would be much better to be doing that job the day after in Newcastle because we're in Middlesbrough the day before, in which case there are maybe some savings to be had. But obviously that from a day-to-day cleaning contract that sort of scenario doesn't exist. And I think it's very difficult to stick to your guns, isn't it? But I suppose that's where, again, the value that your service brings can help, because actually you can be trying to sell on quality and outcome and actually look, we're going to deliver this standard for you, and here's the proof. And actually I think a lot of procurement is about managing risk as well as cost, and so I think if you can put that piece together, that you're the lowest risk option, yes, it might be a bit more, but actually it's lowest risk, you've got the best chance of the best outcome, then you would hope that people would see the sense in that.
No, absolutely, and it's that education piece, and there's such a focus on cost. Everybody's always looking to save money, so you've always got to be aware of and try and balance that cost versus quality, and that's hard for service providers. It really is. So we have some sympathy for them.
Yeah, I don't envy them, that's for sure.
No.
And I always try to. I always try to stick up for them. I mean, sometimes we get called in by a client and it's to look at a problem flaw or whatever, and we kind of sometimes might show up the contractor, but that's not what we're trying to do. And I am always at pains to make the point that we've discussed, which is actually, that's they're delivering what you're paying them to deliver. If you give them a budget for 4 hours work and it's a 12-hour job, well, it's never going to be clean. So you need to get your act together, Mr. Client. That tends to be the message that I'm having to give more often than not.
And that's the same message for us as well. You get what you pay for.
No, absolutely. So how does it work then in terms of the process, Mike? So if somebody's tuning in and thinks, "Oh, that looks interesting," whether they're a contractor or a client, how does the process actually work from getting in touch with you through to what they actually get as an output?
Yeah. Well, the benchmarking process, a full benchmarking review, which is identical regardless of whether you're a service provider or an end user client, or whether you're managing your own in-house team. The process really is to do a desktop exercise to really understand what sites are being cleaned, what sites are being looked after, what resources are currently deployed to do that, and obviously look at the contractual situation, the costs, and the auditing, to sort of try and get a feel of what we think is going on. So we would send out an RFI. It's quite a detailed request for information that's asking for all the staffing data, all the costs, all the breakdowns, the reporting, site data, etc. And we do some initial benchmarking, and this is where we might look at typically cost per square meter, etc. But once we've done that, then we need to get on site and actually look at what's actually happening on the ground. And this is where we triangulate things, if you like, because typical benchmarking just looks at one element at a time, and a lot of the time it is things like cost per square meter. But cost per square meter is irrelevant unless you know what you're getting for that cost per square meter. Yeah. So that's when we would go on site and say, right, let's look at the standards. How effective is the service delivery? And that's how we determine value. So just because you might be spending £20 a square meter and I'm spending £30 a square meter cleaning my building, it doesn't mean that you're getting better value than I am if my building is twice as clean as yours. Yeah. So that's where the on-site activity looks at, right, what are we actually getting? What's happening in practice? Are we getting all the cleaners that we expect to get? Yeah. Are we doing all the tasks or more tasks than in the specification? So particularly with daytime cleaning and janitorial tasks, you would have cleaners that are tasked to say, well, go and check the washrooms on a certain frequency, but as they go around a building, they're dealing with dishwashers and cups and collecting other things that aren't in the specification. So that's the point at which we might be able to say, well, I'm paying £30 a square meter, but my service also includes this, and this, which is something that you're not getting. So, and that's only something you can do when you're on site. Yeah. So again, we are very much hands-on. We want to see not just what equipment is being charged for, but what equipment is actually being used. Is it being used properly, and is it delivering the required results? And as I said before, we're looking at all the operational stuff. So what gets cleaned, when it gets cleaned, how it gets cleaned, what works, what doesn't, and why, productivity rates, etc. We're looking at costs. Are they open and transparent? Are they value for money? We're looking at compliance. Not just have we got method statements and risk assessments, but how are they used on a day-to-day basis, and HR. So it's all about the people, and we look at how staff are recruited, how they're inducted, how they're trained, how they're monitored, how they're supervised, and how they're engaged generally. And often it's the things that you can't measure or that are hardest to measure that have the biggest impact. Yeah. So we can measure things like costs and quantity of chemical. What we can't necessarily measure is job satisfaction and motivation and engagement. Yeah. So those are the things, and of course we've got it's a very transparent process, and the output is exactly the same whether we do that benchmarking for the client or we do it for the service provider. So if we take, typically the example I use is that often with normal consultancy, you never really know if a consultant is going to tell you whether something is half full or half empty, and it's driven by who's paying the bill. Now with benchmarking, you would say, well, that's at 50% capacity, and the benchmark is 60 or it's 40, and that's what you would get regardless of who is driving that exercise. So it's very much a partnership approach. And of course, we produce a very detailed recommendation report that says this is good, this is good, this is good, this is good. this is something we've seen done better because of this. So it's very much there's a lot of guidance in there, taken from all of those different sectors. And that's the key thing. It's about comparing like for like where it's appropriate. So school cleaning costs with school cleaning costs, but trying to find transferable practices from other sectors, maybe something that they're doing in retail or hospitality, that we could transfer to another sector. And those things might be things like environmental or slip or whatever it might be.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it just sounds eminently sensible that that should be done as part of any contract, really, in terms of really knowing where you are, because it just takes out that subjectivity, doesn't it, and makes it more scientific. And I always think cleaning is a science, really. If you've got the same building, but one is 200 square meters and the other one's 800 square meters, well, that needs 4 times the budget because it's 4 times as big. I mean, it's as simple as that. If everything else is the same, of course. I know it's not the same cleaning 400 square meters of office and 400 square meters of car park is a different thing, of course. But
no, absolutely.
Yeah. So, is there anything, Mike, that's happening in the industry that you're kind of seeing in terms of innovations that you think is going to be groundbreaking or changing, swathes of how the industry works, or just are we carrying on small sort of efficiencies here and there to using the sort of British cycling 2% at a time rule?
Yeah, I mean, obviously robotics. That's coming along. I think we will get to a place where that is as a real viable option. At the moment, I think it's still very early days, and really at the 7,500 sites that we've seen, the number of robots that we've seen successfully operating is woeful. But because they will come about, and that will happen. But it's going to be small steps, and I think it's going to be a long time yet before we see a lot of cleaning operatives replaced by robots. It's they call it Amara's law, don't they? I believe it is. Are you familiar with that? So, in the short term, people overestimate the impact of technology, but in the long term, people underestimate the impact of it. And I think that's where we'll be with robots. When they get them right and they get the right price point, the reliability and the testing, then that'll be great. Obviously, data is a big thing as well. Washroom usage data, and being able to understand and identify and react to the hotspots in the building, as opposed to, right, we've got a team of janitors that are going around the building, one toilet at a time from top to bottom and then back down again. We're using data. We can really understand where we've got to focus, and we've done some interesting exercises in retail where they're using washroom data to be a lot more reactive. So again, this is output based. So rather than checking them once an hour, we're going to check the ones that are used most frequently. Most frequently. So I think the data is a big thing. There is a lot of innovation out there. I have to say. I get frustrated sometimes when I speak to people at the trade shows, and they sort of say, "Well, it's the same old stuff," and you just think, "Well, I don't think you're looking hard enough."
I think there's kind of I don't know what sort of familiarity, isn't there, or kind of people have been doing it for such a long time, they kind of see that things and it's hard to change. It's like steering the Titanic, isn't it, away from the iceberg. It's hard to get things to change, but over time, they are changing. I do think though sometimes that contractors do one of the things I would say is nitpicking a bit about them is sometimes they'll want to be talking about innovation this, innovation that, innovation the other thing, and neglecting just to do the basics well. And I think that often hits them hard, because the client actually doesn't necessarily care about the innovation as much as maybe they think. They just want the building to be clean to to the standard that they've promised.
I think you're absolutely right there. Cleaning is not rocket science, and actually, if people just did the basic things well, then they would see a massive improvement. Before we even get to data and robots and whatever, we can just make sure we get the right people in the right place at the right time. They know what to do. They've got the equipment to do it, and they're being supervised. That would be an innovation for a lot of organisations. but yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's about doing simple things well.
Yeah. Well, I know a man who can help you if you're a contractor or a client and you want to try and understand how to do the simple things well in the best possible way. And why don't you give people the best way of getting in touch with you if that's something that they'd like to pick up with you, Mike?
Absolutely. So the best point of contact, really, which has got all the other contacts, is our website at sitemark.co.uk, and you can find us on all the sort of social media channels as well, or via LinkedIn. But we welcome conversation with anybody, not just on the cleaning side. So we use the same process for recycling and waste. That's a really big sector for us. A lot of our business, I think it's almost 35% of our business at the moment, on recycling and waste. Big opportunities there, so we can look at that for an organisation as well. Yeah,
and my impression is, and I could be wrong, there's probably the focus of cost control and nitpicking on costs hasn't been so strong in those sectors, and therefore there might well be more efficiencies to be made there than in the cleaning side of things. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the really interesting thing about recycling and waste is that there are almost always immediate quick wins financially, and even long term. When you get to the point of best practice with cleaning, and because so much of it is labour, and we have labour, wage inflation as it is, you get to the point of optimum efficiency, and you're generally only ever going to go up. And with recycling and waste, if you can deal with your waste streams in the best way, they become an asset and they become valuable. So whilst you could argue cleaning costs are always only ever going to go up, you could argue, and you do argue, and we do argue, and demonstrate that you could actually get to the point of zero cost for your waste, where it becomes an asset of the business. So that's the really exciting bit on the recycling waste side. For a cost-saving point of view, that's a real area to focus on.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Mike, I'm conscious of the time, so thank you very much for investing the time in this. Really enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you at another trade show as and when, or if ever trade shows are running up again, or if not, for a coffee at Paddington one day.
Absolutely, look forward to that. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate that, and look forward to speaking again soon.
Thanks, Mike. Cheers.
All the best. Cheers, man. Bye bye.